Well, the 49ers just lost to the Detroit Lions 40-34 on Monday Night Football. In which was actually a much closer game than many anticipated. A lot of that due to the case that there were zero punts during the game, zero punts, and the 49ers moved the ball very well against the very decimated Detroit Lions defense, which kept the game close. And honestly, the deciding factor for the game were the two interceptions by Brock Purdy, but also the three missed field goals by Jake Moody. More on him a little bit later. But the 49ers, this game honestly was just very comparable to their entire season. The 49ers would show life at the beginning of the game and then seem to fall apart as the game went along. In fact, after halftime, when teams would adjust, the 49ers wouldn't adjust with them. And that goes to show in the several division games where they were leading going into the fourth quarter only to lose in the last few minutes of the game. Look at the Seahawks, look at the Rams, even the Cardinals. Several games that they should have won, in which case they could be playing meaningful football right now, but right now they're not playing meaningful football, and in fact, they're just kind of playing for pride right now. And unfortunately, this game, while it was very exciting at the beginning, kind of began to slowly unravel as the game went along. And you got to give some props to Kyle Shanahan. You got to give props to Chris Forrester because that offensive line was really patched together with several starters out of the game. The only starters that were present would have been Jake Brendel and Dominic Pooney. A lot of other players were either from the practice squad on other teams, and so props to Kyle Shanahan and Chris Forrester getting them ready for Monday Night Football against a very dominant Detroit Lions team. Now, granted, Detroit Lions were missing several of their starters on the defensive side of the ball, so when you don't have a guy pass rushing like Aiden Hutchinson, it makes it a little bit easier on those linemen. But there's a few people that we want to give a shout out before we start talking about what does this mean for the future. What does Brock Purdy look like? We saw him go down, and Joshua Dobbs came in and did very well in his limited snaps, got a touchdown, moved the ball, even though it was already on the Lions side of the field. What is Brock Purdy's injury? Do we have any more information on that? But I want to highlight a few players that really showed out. Let's start off first off with Ricky Pearsall. Ricky Pearsall, who got shot during the offseason, also was injured with a shoulder injury, didn't get a true training camp, didn't get a true preseason. But what we do know is once he started getting his reps throughout the year, started practicing more with the team, we started seeing glimpses and glimpses, and it showed in this game. In fact, if we take a look at the stats, Ricky Pearsall had his first game over 100 yards receiving. In fact, Ricky Pearsall had 8 catches for 141 yards and a touchdown. In fact, he should have had 2 touchdowns. The pass that Brock Purdy threw over the top was a little underthrown, in which case Pearsall had to slow down and cut back. And so it could have been for 150 yards. He could have had 150 and 2 touchdowns, and that didn't end up working out, but he still had a huge breakout game, caught 8 of 10 catches. Unfortunately, the other 2 attempts to him were picks and weren't Pearsall's fault. It was Purdy either staring down or overthrowing him down the middle. But Pearsall really showed out here. There were a lot of questions from other content creators, even analysts, and other people just around the league questioning, was Ricky Pearsall worth a first round pick? And I think this game doesn't say that because that happens over time. That answer is not going to happen for a few years as his career begins to develop. But I think it shows the glimpses that he does bring. The fact that he can run every route in the route tree. The fact that he is okay going up the middle and getting hit. He has toughness. He's got speed. And I think the more and more he learns this offense, the ins and outs, he'll stop thinking here and start just doing on the field. Because a lot of times when you have these rookies, first and second year, wide receivers, running backs, especially the wide receivers, because Kyle Shanahan asks a lot of them. They're trying to figure out what they need to do, be in the right position. Are they on the ball? Are they off the ball? And I think that's what kind of really burdened Ricky Pearsall early on. We saw that last week where he had several different calls against him, pre-snap penalties, just because he wasn't lined up right. But this game, it really, you can kind of see that pre-snap where he was double-checking, even with the ref, making sure he was lined up well. And you love to see that he's learning, he's growing, and hopefully next year he takes that next step because I think he's got a bright future with the 49ers, is going to complement Brandon Ayuk as he comes back from his ACL injury. We don't know about Debo if he'll be back, but we do know that Jawan Jennings is there. You have Brandon Ayuk, who's working his way back, but also Ricky Pearsall, who seems to be a very good wide receiver who's starting to come into his own. Also, George Kittle, 8 catches for 112 yards, caught every single pass that was directed at him. He had 8 targets, caught all 8 of them, 112 yards. His 4 seasons of 1,000 yards receiving, huge for George Kittle. You love to see it. Instant Hall of Famer. I think a lot of props to him. George Kittle, you deserve all the praise. Let's talk about Nick Bosa for a second. The Detroit Lions offensive line is the best in the league. There's no questioning that. You got Penei Sewell. I think it was mentioned today during the game that Penei Sewell is the youngest as far as his experience and has 65 games of experience under his belt. And that offensive line just moves in unison. It's like a symphony watching them play. If you're just a fan of football, you love to see kind of how they run block, how they pass block. But Nick Bosa still seemed to be just as effective during the game. In fact, when you look at Bosa's numbers, he had, I believe it was 4 tackles for a loss. He had 2 sacks, and that's also with the friendly fire where he got hit in the head. At first, we thought he was going to be out with a concussion, but he still wreaked havoc in the game. And I think that's why it's also very important this offseason for the 49ers to invest in the rest of the defensive line. When you have Nick Bosa, you need to bring back DeForest Buckner. We saw how he mentioned just today or yesterday on social media that there's going to be a lot of tough conversations during the offseason. And I think he's right for the picking to bring back home to the Bay Area. Put him back in that interior defensive line because that's one of the 49ers' weaknesses is that defensive line, stopping the run. We noticed when Greenlaw was out, when Bosa was out, opposing teams were able to run the ball at will. And so I think you need to really reinforce that interior defensive line and the opposite side of Nick Bosa. So Nick Bosa did very well. And you know what? Brock Purdy did well at the beginning. Toward the second half of the game, it seemed like the Detroit Lions were starting to see that Brock Purdy was starting to really zero in on receivers. You look at the picks, where he was intending Pearsall. The first one was an overthrow. He threw off the back foot, so he didn't really drive the ball. But the second one, what you really saw was he just kind of zoned in. And so you had Kirby Joseph, who really just kind of read Purdy's eyes and just kind of really went after it. Even though he was kind of playing that high middle spot, wasn't really assigned. He was playing more of a robber type of role. As soon as he saw Purdy locking in Pearsall, he just ran and jumped the route. And so those were the 2 big mistakes that Purdy had in this game. He played outstanding outside of that. But unfortunately, those 2 picks are what decided the game. And in fact, the first pick that he threw back-to-back picks. The first pick was actually overruled because of a pass interference call against the opposing defense as he was targeting George Kittle. And so that got lifted, but he still ended up with 2 interceptions. So the question is he worth the $55 million, $60 million that many people think he's going to be asking for? And I think what really comes down is what is his injury like? Because I think that's also going to play into effect on what he's going to be asking for and what the 49ers are going to be willing to play. In fact, if he re-injured that UCL, what we saw on the replay is that Purdy actually, his elbow got hit by the Lions helmet. And so that could have struck a nerve. Something could have happened. My guess is they're going to probably run some MRI tests. If you notice him kind of warming up on the sideline, it was hard for him to kind of grip the ball. Just his facial expression is very reminiscent of the NFC Championship game against the Lions. And so, against the Eagles a couple years ago, in which Hassan Reddick got that elbow. We saw the UCL injury. And so just his facial expression made it seem like something was off. I hope that's not the case. Brock Purdy, I think, is a very good quarterback. I'm not going to say a great quarterback. I think he's a good quarterback, can run the system well. But if he's hurt, I think that affects what the 49ers are willing to play, depending on how badly hurt he potentially is. I don't see him play next week. I think Joshua Dobbs is going to be under center next week against the Cardinals, and I think we're going to have to see what the extent of this injury is. Is it going to go into the offseason, or is it just a stinger? The hard part for me was seeing him not being able to grip the ball. and kind of just throwing it short and then shaking his head no. Like he knew something was wrong. And so I'd be curious what Kyle Shanahan has to say after the game, what MRI results are going to show. But you got to understand, if that is a lingering issue, you need to bet your top dollar that Parag and John Lynch are going to use that in negotiations, saying that, you know what, you can't stay healthy. We don't know how strong your arm is. You already didn't have the strongest arm in the league. Now it's been hurt to watch all of the throws that Kyle wants to do and his routes that he wants to do. So it really limits what we can pay you. So we need to start paying other playmakers around you. That way we can make up for that deficiency. So in a way, this kind of benefits the 49ers when it comes to negotiations, but you never want to see a player go down in that manner. You don't want to see this be potentially a career ending or even impact how somebody makes their living. And so I've said for the past couple of years that I think the high end for Brock Purdy is 45 million. If it were me, I'd offer between 38 and 42 and kind of cap it at 45. Now, I know you can do a lot of jujitsu with the cap and maybe give a little bit higher signing bonus, and it's really how you position the year's cap hits. That really is what kind of allows you to roster the team. That way you have playmakers there. But I do think that at a certain point, you can't pay Brock Purdy $55-60 million a year. Yes, Dak Prescott's getting that, but where are the Cowboys? They're sitting at home and not in the playoffs. And so if it were me, I would love a Baker Mayfield type of contract, but let's be honest, Brock Purdy's not going to take that type of deal. But I think 45 million is roughly going to be where it's at. But again, it's all going to be dependent on how significant this injury is. How significant is the injury that Brock Purdy is dealing with? And so again, hopefully it's nothing serious, but you can bet your top dollar that that is going to be used in negotiations, especially if this specific injury is going to drag out into the offseason, if he's going to have to go through rehab with this. And so there's going to be a lot to be considered. Now let's talk about Kyle Shanahan here. There's going to be a lot of questions on should he have been playing Brock Purdy in a meaningless game when you have, and you call him your franchise quarterback. Should you be playing Brock Purdy when the game's already over behind a patched up offensive line? If he's your franchise quarterback, as you say he is, why would you risk him in a meaningless game? And in fact, that's what this injury comes down to. Brock Purdy is making $1 million a year. He's still trying to provide for his family, still trying to show his worth. So, of course, he wants to be out there. And it just breaks your heart to see that behind this patchwork offensive line that he got hurt at the end of the game when the game was already sealed. And so, outside of that, I think Kyle had a very good game plan going in. In fact, that first couple of drives, you just saw that he was dialed in. And many people were asking, where was this Kyle throughout the entire year? In fact, he was calling screen passes. There was a lot of motions, a lot of movement. You didn't see really the deficiencies of the offensive line because he was moving the pocket. There were a lot of quick throws. Brock Purdy was making quick decisions. And I want to give a lot of props to Kyle during the first half because he really dialed it in on Monday Night Football on the national stage. And you have to ask, Kyle, where was this all year? Where was this all year? This could have helped make up for several of those things. Where was it a couple weeks ago when you're playing the Rams in a must-win game? And so it's unfortunate that it happened this way. There was a lot of what-ifs, but you know what? The NFL means not for long, which means Kyle Shanahan, you need to use this offseason to really improve as a head coach. Figure out how you can be a better game manager. How can you be, better equip the quarterback room? How can you better equip the coaches to do their jobs well? There has to be a question of, Kyle, are you going to keep Nick Sorensen or not? Or is it going to be time to bring back Robert Saleh? Nick Sorensen played atrocious. His coaching was atrocious this week. The Lions scored 40 points in a meaningless game for them. They ran the ball at will. Nick Sorensen didn't seem to adapt there. I didn't see many times where he had exotic blitzes and he stunts. And in fact, it was one of the times where the defense was healthier. Yes, there was no Dre Greenlaw, but you still had Hufanga back there. You had Jair Brown back there. You had Renardo Green. Yes, you didn't have Charvarius Ward, but you could have still done stunts with your defensive line. There still could have been a fifth or sixth man that's blitzing Jared Goff. Jared Goff had a field day against the 49ers defense. And so the question is Nick Sorensen the answer long term? Kyle Shanahan, that's going to be a call that you need to make, and you need to make it sooner rather than later. You can't have a coaching decision go as long as some of these contract negotiations. And so I think it's clear that you need to bring in a Robert Saleh. Brandon Staley probably needs to go. If he was part of the tree to help with defenses and kind of come in as a consultant, he didn't consult very well, so it might be time for him to go find some greener pastures. And lastly, but not least, we want to kick it over to Jake Moody because boy, did Jake Moody not do well today. I've been a big supporter of Jake Moody, especially back when he was in Michigan with Jim Harbaugh. Jake Moody made some huge kicks again at Ann Arbor, but it seemed since the high ankle sprain, not just is he not making field goals, it seems like there's something psychological going there. Because how did he end the game? He ended the game with a missed PAT and an onside kick that was absolutely atrocious. Absolutely atrocious. And so, yes, you feel for him. You feel for Jake Moody. But at the end of the day he's carrying himself in a way where you automatically know that he's going to miss the field goal. In fact, when he went out for the 58-yarder, if you were listening on TV or if you were at the stadium, he was being booed before he even kicked the field goal. And so it's one of those things where you just knew he was going to miss it. There was no confidence for him or even from his teammates. You got the missed field goal at the end of the game where that could have put it 40-35. Not that it mattered at that time. But then you had the onside kick that wasn't even close. He just booted it straight out of bounds. There was no pop. Several times, if you're going for an onside kick, you practice this during the week where either you hit the ground and on that second or third hop, it goes up very high to give your team a chance just to recover it, or you just try to pooch it high. None of those things happened. In fact, it was one of the perfect endings for a very terrible year for Jake Moody. And again, I'm one of his biggest supporters. I followed him at Michigan with Jim Harbaugh. Big Jim Harbaugh fan. For any of you OG 49er fans that have kind of been there through the rough years when you had your Mike Nolan, then you had Chip Kelly, then you had Tom Sula, you had Harbaugh. You had all of these guys kind of going through. You got to see some of the rougher years, and then you got to see some of the better years. You saw Mike Singletary, I want winners. You'd rather go out with 10 people and get penalized all the way until you have to do something different. And so that's one of the reasons I followed Jake Moody. Is I was a huge fan of Harbaugh, what he brought to the culture of the team. And then as following him, I got to see Jake Moody nail some big kicks at Ann Arbor. Then when he got drafted to the 49ers, thought it was great because that would be a perfect replacement for Robbie Gould, because Robbie Gould, as we know, is as cold as ice, has ice in his veins, did not get easily, you can call timeouts all day and that wouldn't throw him off of his game. He'd made big kick after big kick, especially in the playoffs. So I thought bringing in Jake Moody would be great. But for whatever reason, going from college to the NFL, his success just didn't transfer. Yes, at the beginning of the year, he was 17 of 18 before his high ankle sprain. But even after that, you can kind of see psychologically almost like he didn't believe he was going to make the kick before he kicked the ball. And that's the biggest issue with me, is because when the confidence isn't there anymore, you have the physical attributes to do it, but when the confidence isn't there and you believe you're going to miss it, that's when there's a problem. And the 49ers can't afford to, especially when you have a lot of these single score games, just to continue to wait and see if he's going to get that back. So I think this offseason, the 49ers, if you want to bring in competition for him, that's fine. But I think it's probably time to move on. You had a lot of teammates kind of come around him, say, they support him. You had George Kittle coming in during the game trying to pep talk him. And even after that pep talk, misses an extra point and then absolutely botches the onside kick. Yes, onside kicks. There's only been 3 successful onside kicks all season. But you didn't even give your team a chance. And so I think it's probably time for both to try to just part ways in this case. Maybe new scenery for Jake Moody might be good for him. Maybe he'll have success somewhere else. But I think his time with the 49ers is probably up. And it's unfortunate. You wish him all the success in the world, but the 49ers need to... Special teams has always been one of their Achilles heels. And if there is something you can address right away, you need to do that. You need to do that. And I think the most obvious thing is to address the kicker position. You need somebody, one, that can kick to the end zone regularly on the kickoff, which Jake Moody used to do. He didn't do that much in today's game, but you need somebody that you can kind of depend on when it comes to making the big kicks. The NFC has gotten very strong over the past couple years. You have the Eagles, you have the Detroit Lions, you have the Packers, you have the Bucks that are still kind of hanging around there. You have the Vikings. And if you're going to compete with these teams, you've got to believe that there's going to be several games that come down to one score games or a last minute field goal. And if you don't have a kicker that is confident or that you believe can make those kicks, then you're going to be in a world of hurt. So I think this offseason, the 49ers are going to be in the market for a kicker. And so that's one of those things that you got to keep an eye on. And lastly, we want to leave on a good note. So let's talk about Renardo Green. Renardo Green has been one of the best surprises of this team. The 49ers just nailed their draft this year. They got a lot of good contributors, which is great because the last few years they haven't had as good a draft. But Renardo Green and Malik Mustafa in that secondary. So I want to specifically talk about Renardo Green because I believe Renardo Green is going to be the future opposite of Diamador Lenore. As much as we love Charvarius Ward, he was a top 3 cornerback last year, according to PFF. This year just went through tragedy after losing a child, and this week he's at home while his wife has a firstborn, their son, and so props to the team, prayers out to them. They deserve all the happiness with this new child, but they've gone through just an emotional roller coaster. But being in a contract year, the 49ers just paid Diamador Lenore $18 million a year. I think you need to find areas where you're going to trim fat because you need to rebuild this roster and kind of retool it, especially that defensive line. And I don't see them paying another $18 to $20 million a year for Charvarius Ward to keep him opposite Diamador Lenore. I think that's why they drafted Renardo Green, to put him opposite of Diamador Lenore, and then have another like an Isaac Yadam or pick up another corner maybe in the draft or in free agency. That way when you're running those 3 wide receiver sets, Diamador Lenore can come into the slot and then you have the 2 outside corners. But Renardo Green did very well today. In fact, he had that one breakup against Sam Laporta in the end zone, and I think he's really starting to come into his own. He didn't hit that rookie wall. In fact, Kyle Shanahan in an interview this week said he thought he was about to hit that rookie wall, but seemed to just kind of dig deep and really just starting to show out. And I think he's going to be a huge contributor for years to come, and what a huge pickup in the draft for the 49ers, because they really needed a solid draft, and they did. And Renardo Green just kind of plays with that intensity where he's willing to go up and make that tackle. He's a very gritty and can break up those passes. You saw he didn't have any hesitation defending against Sam Laporta, who is almost twice his size, and making those plays. So the last props I had was for Renardo Green. Huge game for you, even though the 49ers didn't come out with the win. I think this is something where there is things that you can look to the future on. You saw some things on offense that you really love to see. You love to see the emergence of Ricky Pearsall. You love to see Renardo Green really starting to come in his own on defense. You love to see George Kittle get his 4th year with 1,000 yards. I think this is going to be, he's one of the guys that you need to keep around. Give him another contract to make him a 49er for life. Let him retire a 49er. He's not somebody that you want to get rid of even as he's getting a little older. He's still producing at a high rate. So you need to do that. But there's a lot of things that you can build off here. With one game left against the Cardinals, the 49ers have locked in the fourth place in the NFC West, which means next year they play the last place of the opposing divisions, which if you break down the team, which we'll do it in a later video, that actually bodes well for them next year. And basically what their strength of schedule is going to be. And so I think those are some good things to look at, but really that's not why you play the game. You want to figure out, who do we have that is built like a 49er? Who's not going to give up on the team? Who's not going to be a Devondre Campbell, but's going to play through injury, who's going to carry that grit and play week in and week out? And I think we saw a lot of that today, a lot of promising things. Prayers up for Brock Purdy. Hopefully that injury isn't too much. But the 49ers, again, lost the Detroit Lions 40-34, made it competitive, didn't get embarrassed on their home field. But it is one of those things where it's like what ifs, shoulda, coulda, wouldas, and this is essentially how the season went. doing very well and fall apart at the end. And hopefully they can learn a lot from this going into the offseason and into the last game against the Cardinals, and then can turn the chapter on this year and look to next year and retool, get stronger, and come back for a stronger year. Well, that's all we got for today. Don't forget to like and subscribe. That's the best way to support the channel.